The German Kriegsmarine has always been heavily studied for its naval aspects, like its impressive U-boat forces and monstrous warships like the Bismarck. Unfortunately, its surface, ground, and coastal detachments have often been forgotten by researchers and historians alike. This is mainly because of the simple fact that the majority of these men were not in frontline service and therefore were not the many famous battles that are heavily researched today. Later into the war, this is definitely not the case, though. We see many of the men from the Kriegsmarine forced into frontline service in 1945 in an attempt to bolster the Wehrmacht's forces. In the end, without many of these men's support, the Western theater would have been impossible to fight for the Axis powers. This is a brief look at one of these key units, the Marine Artillerie. This branch of the Kriegsmarine was tasked with the defense of a port, or particularly a sensitive coastal sector. For this, it had many batteries spread out along the coasts of itself and occupied countries. Using German guns or guns that have already been left in place by the occupied country's previous naval forces, they transformed the coast into what we call the Atlantic Wall. There were 3 types of these marine artillery designations along the coast, and they go as follows. Number 1, Marine Artillerieabteilung. Number 2, Lichtmarine Artillerieabteilung. These guys had the same function as the previously mentioned marine artillery, but they used infantry companies instead. And lastly, number 3, Marine Flakartillerieabteilung. These guys were the flak artillery along the ports, guarding it from air assault. Before we continue to the uniforms, I'd like to further touch on one more thing that further disproves that these men were not fighters. In March of 1938, the 3rd Marine Artillerieabteilung was tasked with selecting its best NCOs and officers to send them to a special 3-month-long training course. This started with infantry training in Doberitz and sapper training in Dessau-Rosslau. They consisted of 2 rifle platoons, a pioneer platoon, 2 machine gun platoons, a mortar platoon, and lastly, a communication platoon. They were put on alert on August 24th, and on September 1st, at 4:47, they would be the first to fight in the Second World War. I would like to further touch on them eventually. Moving on from the historical section, we can now examine the uniform that was worn by the Marine Artillery. This particular uniform was modeled after the Reichswehr tunics and was issued very early on to the men of the Marine Artillery. This uniform was used till the end of the war and saw service well into 1945. There were production, different changes over the war. You do see some of these tunics with the pleats removed here, and it's similar to the M42 uniform, but the internal pockets remain. Getting into the details, this particular one is set up as an Obermatt, or Petty Officer's Second Class, as denoted by his rank, insignia, and tressa. Most of this insignia is original, including the Schulterklappen, which are sewn into the shoulder seam. The tressa is original. The tabs come from WW2 on Facebook. Highly recommend them. The Bevo breast eagle is an original, folded and applied by myself. It's been correctly applied by flipping it over after doing the first stitch on the top, and I've also hand sewn the wreath. Getting into the awards that I've applied, I have on the left breast pocket the SA Sportabzeichen, or the SA Sports Badge, and on the button line the Kriegsverdienstkreuz Zweite Klasse, or the War Merit Cross. I've decided to not add any combat awards to this particular setup just because it was not the norm as previously discussed, and you wouldn't really be seeing big old Knight's crosses on guys like these. Getting into the buttons, some of the finer details, these are painted in a sand yellow. Now, some buttons on these tunics were in more of a Feldgrau, but I've opted for the sand yellow color for these. The Schiffchen, or the side cap, is a standard M40 variant. It just has different insignia, including a gold eagle similar to the one on the breast. Other than that, This is the Marine Artillery uniform. This particular one was purchased from Military Harbor, and I have set up all this insignia myself. If you would like something sewn, I always accept orders, and I'm very reasonable with my pricing as well. Thank you guys for checking out this video. I hope that you've learned something today, and hopefully you appreciate a smaller unit like this that most people do not look into. Thank you guys, and have a great day.